Hello guys, in this video we will see how the Spring Web Security works at the behind the scene and how to implement Spring Web Security to our Spring Boot project. Then let's get started. First of all, go to Spring Initializer website, then create one project. I will make it Maven project, language Java, then use the latest version of the Spring Boot. Then give the name to the project security demo. Then the package name com.demo. Then packaging jar Java 17. Then let's add one dependency. Search web Spring Web dependency. Then click the generate button. It will generate the project, then download it for you. If you are using IntelliJ Ultimate version, you can do it in your IntelliJ. Go to File, then New Project, then choose the Spring Initializer. Then you can create a project, what we did in the Spring Initializer website. I open the project in IntelliJ, then I will go to Resources, then Templates folder, then create one HTML file. Let's give a name to the file Home. Then give a title. Then inside the body tag, put one h1 tag. Simply say welcome to security demo app. In order to see this view in our browser, we need to create one controller method, but we don't have any dynamic data here. I will not create any controller method. Instead, I will create one config class and register this view in the config class. Let's go to demo package, then right click new Java class, then config dot, let's say web config. I write config.webconfig. In this case, first it will create one config package inside the demo package, then it will create web config class. Since it is a config class, let's annotate the class with configuration. Then I will implement one interface, which is web MVC configurer. Let's look at this interface. It has bunch of methods here. If I scroll down a little bit, in here it has one method named addViewControllers. We can register any static view using this method. I copy the name of the method, then go to config class, then create one method, public void. Name should be addViewController. The method receives view controller registry as a parameter. Let's say registry. Then registry dot add view controller. We can write the endpoint here. So I will write slash. In this case, it refers to localhost 8080. Then set the view name. Set view name. The view name is the name of the HTML file. Let's write home. It is complaining because we don't have any template engine in our project. So I will go to Spring Initializer website and add dependency. then search TimeLeaf. I will use TimeLeaf as a template engine. Then explore. Then choose pom.xml file. In here, it added the dependency Spring Boot starter TimeLeaf. We can copy this part and paste it to our project's pom.xml file, or we can copy everything, then go to our project, then go to pom file, then select everything and replace it. Then refresh. Then go to config class. Now it recognizes the home.html file. So if I run the application and go to browser and visit the localhost 8080, it will show me the home.html file. Now let's create one controller method for the postman. Right click the demo package, then new Java class. Let's say controller dot, let's say home controller. In this case, it will create controller package, then create home controller class. Let's annotate the class with REST controller. Then let's put the request mapping. Then give the endpoint slash API slash v1 slash, let's say home. Let's create one get method. Public return type. Let's use response entity. For the body, I will use string. Then let's say get home page. Then return simply response entity dot okay dot body. Inside the body, let's say welcome to API endpoint. Now I create one endpoint here, localhost 8080. It will return the home.html file, and I create one controller class. Inside the controller class, I have one get mapping. It will return welcome to API endpoint. Let's start our application and test it. The application up and running. It runs port 8080. Go to browser, then localhost 8080. I got the correct response. Let's test this REST API endpoint. Then go to Postman, then localhost 8080 slash API slash v1 slash home. Let's make a GET request. Send it. I got the correct response. Welcome to API endpoint. Everything works without any error. Now, in order to secure our endpoints, let's add one dependency to our project. Go to Spring Initializer website, then close this one, then add dependency, then search security, Spring security dependency, then explore, then pom.xml file and copy everything. Then go to project, go to pom file and select everything and replace it. Then refresh. Then restart the application. The application up and running. Then go to browser. Then refresh. This time I got one sign-in form. And let's check the postman and send the request. This time here I got 401 unauthorized. Let's look at our console. There is one password, generated security password. Let's copy this one. Then go to browser. Username, say user. Paste the password. Then sign in. Now I got the response. Let's try it in the postman. Go to authorization. Then select basic auth. Then for the user name, say user and paste the password. Then send. Now I got the response. What's happened at the behind the scene? I only add one dependency to our project, which is Spring Web Security dependency. Then the Spring secured every endpoint in my project. Whenever the user trying to get some endpoints from my project, Spring forced the user to authenticate themselves. Then after the authentication, user can see what they want to see. Let's see the flow of the Spring security. What's happening at the behind the scene and how the sign-in form came. Let's look at the Spring documentation. The documentation says when we add Spring Web Security dependency to our project, Spring Security by default add one default security config class to our project and annotate the class with enable web security annotation. This annotation invokes the Spring Security default filter chain. We will talk about filter chain later soon. Then the filter chain being protect or secure our application's endpoints. We can define everything about our endpoints and login forms inside the security filter chain bean. Inside the security config class, we have two beans. One is user details service bean. It annotated with conditional on missing bean. If there's no bean named user details service, Spring by default use this bean as a default user details service bean. Then inside this bean, Spring use in-memory user details manager because the user details service is an interface and in-memory user details manager implement this user details service. Inside the method, in-memory user details manager generates one password, string password, then create one user with the name user. For the authorities or roles, it use role user. So we can got the password here. Every time we start the application, the in-memory user details service generates one password and use this password generates one user with the name user. Then second bean is authentication event publisher. This bean published the authentication events like success event and failure event. How does the login form came? Let's look at the diagram. Since we add Spring security dependency to our application, every endpoint is secured in our application. Then client sends a GET request to our endpoint, which is localhost 8080. Then since the endpoint is secured, then the Spring default security filter chain do some filter here, and since the endpoint is secured and user unauthenticated, it returns access denied exception. Then exception translation filter return back to the user with the login URL. Then the user make GET request to the login URL endpoint. Then the login controller responds with the login form. Let's also see the authentication process. Assume the user made a GET request to our application secured endpoint. Then the security filter chain redirects the user to the login or sign-in form. Then the user entered the username and the password. Then the username and password authentication token received by the authentication manager. The authentication manager calls the authentication provider to authenticate the user. The authentication provider uses the user details service bean to find the user and password. After the authentication provider finds the user and the password, it uses the password encoder to validate the password. Then, after the user authenticated, the authentication manager returns back the username and the password authentication token to the authentication filter. Then the authentication filter put the authenticated user to the security context holder. Once the user authenticated, the user can see the secured endpoint. If we want to use our own users for authentication, only thing we need to do create a user details service and create one password encoder being one of the configuration class. How we can use our own users to authentication. To use our own users, we can create user details service bean in our application. So I will go to config class and create one class security config. Then let's annotate the class with configuration. Then let's create a bean public user details service. Let's say user details service. Let's look at the user details service class. It is an interface. To create user details service, we can use its one of the implementation class, or we can implement over to our class user details service interface. So I will use its one of the implementation. Let's click here. It has a bunch of implementation. I will use in-memory user details manager. Let's look at this one. To create in-memory user details manager, we can use its constructors. It has one nor constructor here. It has one constructor here. It takes list of user details as a parameter. Then it also has one constructor here. It takes number of user details. I will use this one to create user details manager. So I need first create user details. Let's look at user details. It is an interface. To create user details, either we can implement this interface to our custom classes, or we can use its one of the implementation class. Let's look at its implementation classes. It has 3 implementation class. I will use this one. Let's look at this one. Let's look at its constructor. It has one constructor here and another constructor here. I will use this one. To create user details, we need to pass to the user to 3 parameters: the username, the password, and list of authorities. Go to security config class. Then first let's create user details. User details, let's say user1 equal to create user details, we can use user class because the user class implements user details interface. Let's say new user. It should be come from Spring Framework security.core user details.user. Then it takes 3 parameters. The first one is username. Let's say Mike. Then second one is password. Let's say 123. The third one is the authorities. I will use one empty list. Collections dot empty list. I create one user details. Then create another one. User details. User2 equal to, this time I will use users builder method. Builder. Then that username. Username, let's say Bob. Then that password. For the password, use 124. Then dot build. I create 2 users, user1 and user2. To create user details service, I can use in-memory user details manager and pass the user details to in-memory user details constructor and return it. Let's write return in-memory user details manager. Let's pass the users, user1 and user2. Let's put here new. I create user details service bean. So if I restart our project, we can use our own users here. Let's restart the application. This time it didn't give me any generated password. Go to browser and localhost 8080, then the form came. Let's write mic, then password 123, sign. There's something wrong in our application. Let's look at the console. Password encoder. Since the authentication provider by default use in encoded password for the authentication, we need to encode our password before create the user details. Let's add one bean for the password encoder. Password encoder. Let's say public password encoder, and return new decrypted password encoder. Then let's encrypt the password using password encoder. So copy this one, then password encoder dot encode. Let's test the password here. 123. Then let's convert this one. Password encoder dot encode, then 124. Let's restart the application. The application up and running. Go to browser, then localhost 8080, mic here 123. Now I can use my own users here. Let's try Bob in the Postman. Go to Postman, then send. Since we use own users, I got 401 unauthorized. Let's use Bob this time. Bob and password 124. Then send. Then I got the response. How we can use our own login form to authenticate users. To use our own login form, we need to customize the default security filter chain. First of all, I will create one login form inside the templates folder. I already downloaded one login form and I will paste the form here. Then I also paste its CSS and JS files inside the static folder and paste here. I paste its CSS and JS files here. I customize this login form. There are some rules to follow if we want to customize login form. Let's talk about these are two. Since we use Timeleaf as a template engine, we should specify Timeleaf here. Then in the form here, we should make a post request to the /login endpoint because the Spring Security by default get the user's information from the /login endpoint. If we want to use different endpoint here, we can use anything other than /login, but we should specify the same endpoint in the security filter chain. Then we should give a name attribute for the username and the name attribute for the password. Otherwise, Spring couldn't get the user information and couldn't authenticate the user. I will go to security config class and then customize the security filter chain bean here. First of all, we need to enable the Spring Web Security. So add the bean enable web security annotation top of the security config class. Then create security filter chain bean. Let's create public security filter chain. Let's say filter chain. It takes HTTP security as a parameter. Let's say HTTP security. Then let's use return. Let's use its builder method. HTTP security dot first of all use cross-site protection CSRF. Then I use its default one, customize with defaults. Let's add the exception here. Then authorize HTTP request. Then say request. Let's use Lambda expression. Request dot request matches. Since we use our login form as a authentication form, so we need to give permission to all the users to access the login form. Say pattern here localhost 8080/login. Then say this one dot permit all. Every user can get this endpoint. Say just here. Then dot form login and form dot login page. Let's give the endpoint /login. Then let's make the default success URL endpoint. Success URL. Default success URL. In this case, it is a home page. Then dot build. We customize the security filter chain. If the user wants to get our application, first the security filter chain do some filters. It protects the cross-site attacks. Then if the user wants to see other than login page, it will redirect the user to the login page. To use this login page, we need to register this login page. To go to web config class, then duplicate this one, then register here login, and also the HTML file name is login. Let's start our application and let's check if there's anything wrong or not. The application is up and running. Let's go to browser, then refresh. Since our application secures everything in our project, the login page didn't access the CSS or JS files. Let's fix first. Go to security filter chain and then add the CSS and JS files here. Let's say by default Spring knows the static file as a root, so we don't need to give the full path of these files. Only we give the file name /css and / everything inside it. Then js / everything inside it. Then /scss / everything inside it. Then also say other than these endpoints and these folders, everything protected. Any request dot authenticate. Let's restart the application. Then go to browser. Then localhost 8080. Then use the mic. Then 123. I can get the home page. That's all for this video. Next video we will create some users from the Postman, then save them into our PostgreSQL, then use that users for the authentication. If you want to get the source code, the code is in my GitHub. I will leave the links below at the description. Then see you all in the next video.